Lan Jingyi pulled open the gap in the door and glanced outside, then immediately blocked it with his body. "There's so many," he said, tripping over his tongue, eyes opened wide. "Walking corpses? How many is so many?" Wangxian asked. "I don't know. They're all over the entire street. There must be several hundred, and more of them are coming. I don't think the 2 paper effigies can hold them." If the pair guarding the door was unable to stop them, all of the walking corpses gathered on the street would rush into the shop. If Wangxian and the others tried to cut the corpses down, they would be poisoned and forced to fight for their lives in close quarters. The poison would circulate through them quickly. But if they didn't, the corpses would scratch and bite and kill them. Xiao Xingchen lifted his sword, intending to take his leave, probably to use what remained of his strength to fight off as many corpses as he could. However, a violet flush surged into his cheeks, and he tumbled to the floor. "Why don't you relax and take a seat?" Wangxian said. "The problem will be solved very soon." In one fluid motion, he ran his right index finger across Lan Jingyi's blade, slicing open his flesh. Beads of blood dripped from the wound. "Are you going to use the summoning of the painted eyes again?" Lan Jingyi asked. "How much blood are you going to use on the paper effigy's eyes? Do you want to use some of mine?" Immediately, several other youths pulled back their sleeves. "I can give you some of mine too." Wangxian wasn't sure whether to laugh or to cry. "There's no need. Does anyone have a blank seal?" The disciples were still young and were yet to reach a level of cultivation where they could draw their own seals on the spot. Thus, all of the seals they had on hand had been pre-drawn. Lan Sidre shook his head. "No." Wangxian didn't mind. "Pre-drawn is fine too." The boy pulled out a stack of yellow seals from his chenkan pouch, but Wangxian only took one. He gave it a cursory glance, then pressed his index and middle fingers together and drew along the cinnabar markings. His script flew like a dragon and danced like a phoenix from the top to the bottom of the paper, the crimson blood and scarlet cinnabar merging into a new seal. With the flick of a wrist, the yellow paper and red script ignited in midair. Wangxian extended his left hand and caught the ash as it drifted downward. His fingers closed into a fist, and he lowered his head slightly. Then he opened his hand and blew the black ashes in his palm toward the row of paper effigies. "The wildfire cannot destroy the grass. When the spring wind blows, it is reborn," he whispered. The ash flew into their faces. The shadow guard standing at the front suddenly lifted the machete propped against his leg and placed it on his shoulder. Beside him, a woman adorned in lavish attire, whose hair was piled tall atop her head, slowly lifted her right arm. She twirled her long, slender fingers like a languid noblewoman and absent-mindedly examined her long, scarlet nails. Effigies of the golden boy and the jade girl stood at her feet. The boy mischievously pulled on the girl's braid. The girl turned, and a foot-long tongue suddenly stretched forward from her tiny mouth. As though it were a fierce and venomous snake, it punctured a large hole in the boy's chest, then shortly withdrew. The golden boy opened his mouth wide, displaying 2 rows of ghoulish white teeth, and bit the jade girl's wrist. The 2 paper children had started fighting each other first. 20 or 30 paper effigies stumbled upward one by one. They shook themselves as though loosening their muscles and whispered to each other, filling the room with rustling. They weren't human. They were better than human. "Hold your breath," Wangxian said. When he finished, he moved back, opening a path to the entrance. He straightened a bit and gestured invitingly. The wooden doors were suddenly thrown open again, and the sweet and rotten scent of corpse poison poured inside. Everyone immediately raised their sleeves and covered their mouths. The shadow guard roared and led the charge forward, and the remaining paper effigies filed out after him. The wooden door closed behind the last paper effigy. No one breathed in any poison, right? Wangxian asked. Everyone indicated that they hadn't. Wangxian helped Xiao Xingchen up, hoping to find a place for him to lay down, but couldn't find a suitable location. Xiao Xingchen had no other option but to sit on the ice-cold, dust-caked floor. Still clinging tightly to his sword Shuanghua, he finally awoke from his semi-stupor. He coughed a few times and said weakly, "So, right then, was that the summoning of the painted eyes?" "I know a thing or two," Wangxian said. Xiao Xingchen thought for a moment, then smiled. Eliminating these walking corpses is indeed the technique's best use. A moment passed before he spoke again. "However, it's very easy for the fierce spirits that serve you to bite back if you follow this road. Even the yelling patriarch Wangxian, the sage who first carved the path through this mountain, hasn't been able to escape such a fate. Personally, I can recommend that, sir, you be cautious from now on and avoid using these techniques unless you have no other choice. Use most of your time to cultivate something else." Inwardly, Wangxian sighed, and he said, "Thank you for the advice." Most famous cultivators would have drawn a clear line, planting their flags firmly against him. They would have claimed to be unable to live under the same sky as a certain person. But even as he was on the brink of death, this young disciple uncle of Wangxian's gave only diplomatic advice, reminding him to be careful that his techniques might backfire. It was clear that his character was kind and gentle, and that he had a soft heart. Wangxian looked at the thick bandages around Xiao Xingchen's eyes, thought about what he had been through, and couldn't help but sigh in pity. Ordinarily, only young, inexperienced cultivators found the taboo arts novel enough that it overcame their hatred and disgust. With the exception of Jinling, whose expression had been foul throughout, the other disciples had jammed themselves right next to the gap in the door to watch the fight. "Save me. That female effigy's nails are terrifying. If she scratches you just once, it'll gouge 5 lines into your skin. Why is that little girl's tongue so long and hard? Is she a hanged ghost? The man is so strong, he can pick up so many walking corpses at once. He's going to hurl them into the ground. Look, look, look! He's doing it. He's broken them." After listening to Xiao Xingchen's kind words, Wangxian grabbed the last bowl of glutinous rice congee. "You're already heavily poisoned," he said. "This bowl has something that could slow it down, but it might not do anything, and it tastes really bad. Do you want to give it a try? If you don't want to live, then so be it." Xiao Xingchen extended his hands and took the bowl. "Of course I want to live. If I can live, then it's best to try." However, after he lowered his head and took a bite, the corner of his mouth twitched, and only by pressing his lips firmly shut did he avoid throwing it back up. After quite a while, he finally courteously said, "Thank you." Wangxian turned. "Did you see that? Did you see that? What did he say? And you brats complained after eating the congee I made." "Since when did you make it?" Jinling said. "What did you do, other than add a whole bunch of weird things to it?" "But now that I've thought about it for a bit, if I had to eat this every day, I would choose death instead," Xiao Xingchen said. Jinling let out a merciless, jeering laugh, and even Lan Sidrui was unable to hold back a pfft. Wangxian looked at them, speechless, and Lan Sidrui rapidly sobered. Just then, Lan Jingyi said joyously, "Wow, they've killed them all. We won!" Xiao Xingchen lowered his bowl. Do not open the door yet. Be careful. I'm afraid there will be more. Don't put the bowl down. Pick it up and finish it, Wangxian said. As he spoke, he approached the wooden door and glanced through the gap at the street that had just played host to the inhuman brawl. Thin fog and a cloud of violet-red dust rose from the ground along the entire street. Gradually, the corpse poison began dissipating. The group of paper effigies leisurely patrolled up and down the thoroughfare, which was covered in dismembered body parts. When they encountered one which could still move, they stomped on it violently until it was no more than a puddle of bloody flesh. Otherwise, the scene was silent, for now no new walking corpses had arrived. Just as Wangxian was about to relax, he heard a strange, very quiet movement over his head. The noise was nigh imperceptible. It sounded as though someone was walking very briskly over the roof tiles. Someone whose motions were abnormally quick and agile, whose footsteps were nearly silent. With his keen senses, Wangxian was just able to catch the slight sound of the tiles bumping into each other. But the movement could hardly escape the blind Xiao Xingchen's notice. Above, he alerted. Disperse, Wangxian shouted. As soon as he spoke, a large hole broke through the roof over the main hall. Dust, leaves, broken tiles, and rainwater fell downward in turn. Fortunately, all of the youths had already scattered, so no one was struck by the collapsing debris. A dark silhouette jumped down from the gap overhead. The figure was dressed in a black Taoist robe. He was tall, with a back as straight as a paintbrush handle, and he stood like a dark pine. Attached to the back of his waist was a horsetail whisk, and in his hand he held a long sword. His face was crisp and handsome, though his head was slightly lifted, giving him an arrogant appearance. However, his eyes were empty of pupils, an expanse of deathly white. It was a fierce corpse. As soon as everyone realized this, he lifted his sword and attacked. He lunged toward the person nearest to him. Jinling blocked the strike with his sword, but the blade bore down upon him with enormous strength, causing his arm to go numb. If it wasn't for Sui Hua's extraordinary spiritual power, his sword probably would have broken and he would have succumbed. The first strike unsuccessful, the fierce corpse struck again. Though each of his motions was as light as the clouds and as fluid as water, his strike had the vengeful ferocity of a hatred as deep as the ocean. This time, he slashed directly at Jinling's arm. In the boy's moment of desperation, Xiao Xingchen drew his sword and blocked the attack. But, perhaps because of the corpse poison's upward flow, he finally fell to the ground, motionless. Is he dead or alive? Lan Jingyi asked, horrified. I've never seen such a quick and agile fierce corpse, who was such a fine swordsman. He stopped mid-sentence because he abruptly remembered that he had, in fact, seen such a thing. The ghost general was the same. Thoughts whirled around in Wei Wuxian's head as his gaze fixed upon this Taoist cultivator. He pulled the flute from his waist. As soon as he placed it to his lips, he blew a long, ear-piercing, mournful note, causing everyone to cover their ears. When the Taoist heard the sound, he swayed and his sword hand trembled, but in the end, he still thrust his sword at them. Wei Wuxian couldn't control him. He already had a master. While dodging the lightning-quick attack, Wei Wuxian blew another tune. A moment later, the paper effigies that had been patrolling outside also leapt onto the rooftop and descended through the hole. Sensing something strange, the fierce corpse slashed twice with the sword in his right hand, quartering a pair of paper effigies. With his left hand, he pulled out the horsetail whisk. The thousands of soft white threads seemed to transform into a stinging mace, which could crack open heads or break limbs with a single swipe. If it accidentally brushed by someone, it would run through their flesh and turn their body into a leaking, bloody sieve. Though busy with 100 things at once, Wangxian nonetheless found the opportunity to cry. "Don't come near, be good, and stay in the corner." Once he finished speaking, he immediately continued to play commands. The sound of his flute was sometimes light and upbeat, sometimes loud and furious. Though the Taoist fought with both hands and was extremely fierce and violent, the paper effigies continued to descend in an unending stream. They surrounded him and attacked. Though he struck back here and there, as soon as he killed the ones in front of him, the ones behind him would charge. Strength alone was not enough to overcome them. Suddenly, a shadow god tumbled down from the sky, slamming into him. The paper effigy pressed his foot into the Taoist's shoulder, pinning him to the ground. Immediately afterwards, 3 other shadow gods jumped down from above, crashing into him one by one. According to legend, shadow gods had extraordinary strength. When craftsmen created effigies of them, they would add a few things to their bodies to increase their weight. Once wild souls were summoned into the effigies, the weight of each would grow to even deadlier proportions. Being crushed by a single one was like being crushed under Mount Tai. If 4 smashed into someone at once, they would be amazingly lucky if they didn't spit out their internal organs. The fierce corpse in the Taoist robes was rendered completely immobile under their weight. Wangxian walked over and discovered that part of the cloth covering the corpse's back had been torn open. He flattened it and saw a thin and narrow cut near the corpse's shoulder blade. "Turn him over," Wangxian said. The 4 shadow guards obeyed and flipped the body face up, allowing him to scrutinize it more conveniently. Wangxian stuck out his still bleeding finger and brushed it near the guard's lips as a reward. They extended their bright red tongues and slowly licked up the blood, savoring each drop. Only then did Wangxian lower his head and continue his examination. The fabric on the left side of the Taoist's chest, near his heart, sported a similar hole, and a similar thin wound lay beneath it. It seemed he had died by being stabbed through the heart. Throughout Wangxian's examination, the corpse struggled with all of its might. Quiet snarls issued from its throat, and raven black blood flowed from the corners of its lips. Wangxian pinched its cheek to force its mouth open. When he glanced inside, he discovered that someone had pulled out the corpse's tongue from the root. Blind, missing a tongue. Blind, missing a tongue. Why were these 2 traits so common? After a long period of observation, Wangxian concluded that the corpse closely resembled Wen Ning, while he had been under the control of the long, black nails. As he contemplated this, he reached out and felt the corpse's scalp near its chi points. To his surprise, he indeed found 2 bits of metal. The black nails controlled high-level fierce corpses by depriving them of conscious, independent thought. Since Wangxian didn't know the identity or the character of the corpse, he couldn't remove the nails rashly. He had to carefully question the corpse first. But because its tongue had been pulled out, it wouldn't be able to tell them much either, even if it regained consciousness. He turned to the Lun juniors and asked, "Which of you have studied soul inquiry?" Unsujie raised his hand. "Me, I have." "Did you bring your chin with you?" "Yes," he replied. Immediately, he pulled out a simple, elegantly designed chin, whose wood shone brightly. The chin looked very new to Wangxian. "How advanced are you? Have you used it in a real-life situation? When you call a spirit, will it be able to lie?" Wangxian said that Sijue's chin skills are decent enough, Lun Jingyi interjected. If Lan Wangji said that they were decent enough, they certainly would be decent enough. He wouldn't exaggerate or diminish Sijue's skill. Thus, Wangxian was put at ease. Wangxian said that I should focus on quality not quantity, Lan Sidre said. The spirit I invite can refuse to answer, but it certainly won't be able to lie. As long as he's willing to answer, what he says has to be true. Then let's begin, Wangxian said. Lan Sidre laid the gojitsutan flat in front of the Taoist's head and sat on the floor. The hem of his robe spread neatly around him. He tried a couple of notes and nodded. First question, who is he? Wangxian said. Lan Sidre thought for a bit, then silently mouthed a mnemonic. Only then was he prepared to play a phrase. After a while, the strings began to vibrate. 2 stone-piercing notes sounded. Lan Sidre's eyes went wide. What did he say? Lan Jingyi urged. Song Lan, Lan Sidre replied. Xiao Xingchen's intimate friend and cultivation companion, Song Lan. Without intending to, everyone turned their gaze to Xiao Xingchen, who was still collapsed on the floor. Lan Sidre whispered, I don't know whether he knows that that's Song Lan. Jinling also lowered his voice. He probably doesn't know. He's blind, and Song Lan is mute, and has been turned into a mindless, fierce corpse. It's best if he doesn't know. Second question. Ask him who killed him, Wangxian said. Lan Sidre carefully played another phrase. This time, the silence lasted 3 times longer. Just when they were beginning to think that Song Lan's soul didn't want to reply, the strings began to vibrate. 3 sorrowful notes played. That's impossible, Lan Sidre blurted out. What did he say? Wangxian asked. Lan Sidre's voice was filled with disbelief. He said, Xiao Xingchen. Song Lan's killer was Xiao Xingchen. They had only asked 2 questions in total, but who could have known that the answer to each would be more shocking than the next? You probably played it wrong, Jinling said suspiciously. But who are you and who killed you are 2 of the simplest questions in all of soul inquiry, and the most frequently asked. They're the first and second sentences everyone learns when starting out. I've practiced them a million times. I even reviewed and confirmed the phrases again just now. I can't have played them wrong. Either you played soul inquiry wrong, or you translated the language of the Qin wrong, Jinling said. Lan Sidre shook his head. If playing wrongly is impossible, translating incorrectly is even more impossible. Xiao Xingchen, these 3 words and the name aren't commonly part of answers. Even if he had answered some other name and I translated it incorrectly, I couldn't have come up with that. Song Lan was looking for the missing Xiao Xingchen, yet Xiao Xingchen killed him. Why would he kill his own close friend? He doesn't seem like that kind of person, Lan Jingyi muttered. Don't worry about that now, Wangxian said. Sidre, the 3rd question. Who is controlling you? Lan Sidre wore a look of solemn concentration. Afraid to even breathe too much, he played the 3rd phrase. Many pairs of eyes were fixed on the Qin strings, waiting for Song Lan's reply. They could only listen to Lan Sidre translate word by word. The person behind you. Everyone whirled around immediately and saw that Xiao Xingchen, who had originally been lying unconscious on the ground, was now sitting up and resting his cheek on his hand. He smiled at them slightly and raised his left hand, which was clad in a black glove. He snapped his fingers. The crisp, clear sound seemed to explode as it met Song Lan's ears. Suddenly, he flung away all 4 of the shadow guards who had been holding him down. He leapt up, once again wielding his sword and horsetail whisk side by side, twisting and slicing at the effigies until they were nothing more than colorful scraps of paper fluttering to the ground. He pressed the sword against Wangxian's neck and pointed the horsetail whisk threateningly at the young disciples. The atmosphere inside every centimeter of the store changed in an instant. Jinling placed his hand on his sword. Wei Wuxian saw the movement in the corner of his eyes and said, "Don't move. Don't cause trouble. The sword skills of everyone here put together are no match for Song Lan's." His body's spiritual power was low, and he did not have a sword on him. On top of that, Xiao Xingchen was standing nearby. No one knew his intentions, or whether he was friend or foe. "Let the adults talk. You children should run along now," Xiao Xingchen said. He gestured at Song Lan, who silently obeyed and drove the juniors outside. "It's best if you all go," Wei Wuxian said to them. "You aren't of any help here anyway. All of the poison should have settled to the ground already. Don't run around or disturb the poison powder, and breathe slowly." Though Jinling did not want to accept that he wasn't of any help here, and he was annoyed and unwilling to stand around waiting to be captured, in his heart he knew that he was indeed powerless. He marched outside in a huff. Before Lan Sijue exited as well, he wanted to say something, but hesitated. "Sijue, you're the most mature of everyone. Take care of them. Do you think you're up to it?" Lan Sijue nodded. "Don't be afraid," Wei Wuxian said again. "I'm not afraid," he replied. "Truly?" "Truly," Lan Sijue said, and he even smiled. "Senior Mo, you and Han Guangjun are really similar." "Similar?" Wei Wuxian said with surprise. "How are we similar?" He and Lan Wangji were clearly as different as the heavens and the earth. But Lan Sijue just smiled, said nothing, and led the remaining people outside. "I don't know either," he thought silently, "but you two just feel similar. It feels as though, as long as one of you two seniors is present, I don't need to be scared of anything." Xiao Xingchen pulled out a red pill from somewhere unseen and swallowed it. How moving. After he consumed the pill, the violet-red coloring on his face rapidly receded. "The antidote to corpse poison?" Wei Wuxian asked. "Correct. It's much more effective than your terrifying kanji, right? Plus, it's sweet." "What a show, sir. Everything from your dauntless battle with the corpses, where you used all of your remaining strength to slay them, but it wasn't enough, to blocking the sword for Jinling and falling unconscious. It was all an act, just for us." Xiao Xingchen lifted a finger and wagged it in front of his face. "It wasn't an act for them. It was an act for you. It's an honor to meet the distinguished Healing Patriarch. Seeing you once is better than hearing about you 100 times." Wei Wuxian had no reaction to this. He stood still and said nothing. Xiao Xingchen continued. "Let me guess, you still haven't told the others about your true identity, right? So I didn't expose you either. I let them leave. We closed the door so we could have a private conversation. How about it? Aren't I so thoughtful?" "The walking corpses in Yi City, they're all under your control?" Wei Wuxian asked. "Of course. Ever since you entered and whistled, I thought you were a little strange, so I chose to personally join in on the action to get a reading. Sure enough, you were able to produce so much power from even such a low-level technique as the summoning of the painted eyes. You must be its inventor." Xue Yang had followed in Wei Wuxian's footsteps. The path they cultivated was the same path. They were both practitioners of evil arts. Wei Wuxian couldn't fool a fellow traveler. "So you turned this group of children into your hostages. What exactly do you want from me?" "I want you, my honorable senior, to help me with something. Just a small favor," Xiao Xingchen said, smiling. Wei Wuxian's mother's junior, calling him senior. This really made a mess of their generational statuses. As Wei Wuxian was silently chortling, he saw Xiao Xingchen take out a spirit-locking pouch and place it on the table. "Please," Xiao Xingchen said. Wangxian laid his hand on the spirit-locking pouch, testing the way that it pulsed. Whose soul is this? It's so shattered, it'll be impossible to paste it back together. Only a single breath of life is left. If it was so easy to glue it back together, why would I need to ask you for help? Wangxian said. Wangxian withdrew his hand. You want me to fix the soul? Forgive me for being so blunt, but there aren't nearly enough fragments in there for that. Plus, the soul's owner must have suffered tremendous torment and agony when they were alive. They very probably died by suicide and don't ever want to return to this world. If a soul has no will to live, then 9 times out of 10, it'll be impossible to save them. If my guess is right, someone gathered these bits of their soul together by force. Once the spirit-locking pouch is opened, they could scatter at any time. You must understand this already. I don't understand, Wangxian said. I don't care. You have no choice but to help me. Senior Wei, don't forget. Those children in your care are standing outside. They're completely looking to you to get them out of danger. Wangxian's style of speech was very peculiar. It was affectionate and a bit saccharine, but also possessed an air of inexplicable malice, as though one minute he would call you brother and senior, and the next he would change his face and kill you. Sir, meeting you once is better than hearing about you 100 times as well, Wangxian said. Xueyang, you were doing perfectly well as a hoodlum. Why are you pretending to be a cultivator? After a pause, Wangxian raised his hand and pulled off the bandages over his eyes. They fell down layer by layer, revealing a pair of eyes that glittered like bright stars. A pair of intact eyes. His face was young and charming. It could be called handsome, but his canines poked out when he smiled. Though he was cute and had a childish air about him, hidden within his eyes was an intangible, wild cruelty. Xueyang threw the bandages aside. Yeah, you discovered me. You purposely pretended to shrink back in pain so that we couldn't in good conscience remove your bandages to check your eyes. You purposely let us see a part of Shuanghua, purposely said you were a wandering cultivator, acting as though it had been a slip of the tongue. Not only did you trick us into trusting you by injuring yourself, you also took advantage of our compassion and acted like a pure, young cultivator, admirably devoted to righteousness. If not for the fact that you knew and understood too much that you shouldn't, I truly couldn't have logically concluded that you were anyone but Wangxian. On top of that, during soul inquiry, Songlan's answers to the final 2 questions were Wangxian and the person behind you. If the person behind them had been Wangxian, Songlan would have had no reason to change the way he had answered. Unless Wangxian and the person behind you weren't the same person. Songlan wanted to alert them that the person was very dangerous, but couldn't answer Xueyang because he was afraid they wouldn't recognize the name. He could only reply as such. Whose fault is it that his reputation is good and mine is bad? Xueyang said, laughing. Of course, I have to pretend to be him in order to gain people's confidence more easily. Your acting is exquisite, Wangxian said. Not at all, not at all. I have a very famous friend. His acting is exquisite. I'm ashamed of my inferiority. All right, we've talked enough nonsense. Senior Wei, you have no choice but to help me. You made the nails being used to control Songlan and Wenning, correct? You were even able to restore half of the yin tiger tally. Why would you need my help to repair a soul? It's not the same, Xueyang replied. You are the one who carved the path through the mountain. If you hadn't made the first half of the yin tiger tally, I wouldn't have been able to make the second half on my own. Of course, you're more awe-inspiring than me. So if I can't do something, you still definitely can. Wei Wuxian didn't understand why strangers were so strangely self-confident for him. He rubbed his chin, unsure whether he should be polite and flatter Xue Yang in turn. "You're too modest," he said. "This isn't modesty, this is fact. I've always disliked empty exaggerations. If I say I'm going to kill a whole family, then it would absolutely be the whole family. I won't even spare a single dog." "Like the Yueyang Chang clan, for example?" Wei Wuxian asked. Before Xue Yang could reply, the main door suddenly burst open and a black figure flew inside. Wei Wuxian and Xue Yang simultaneously retreated, parting from the table. Xue Yang hastily snatched the spirit-locking pouch away. Song Lan pressed lightly against the table with one hand and vaulted himself up. He did a flip in midair and landed back on the table. Once he had steadied himself, he immediately jerked his head upward and looked toward the entrance. Threads of black blood climbed up his cheeks. Wen Ning broke down the door with heavy blows and dragged his chain-laden body inside, white fog and black winds swirling around him. Earlier, when he had first put his lips to his flute, Wei Wuxian had blown the summons for Wen Ning. He said to the fierce corpse, "Fight outside. Don't obliterate him. Be mindful of the living, and don't let other walking corpses come near." Wen Ning lifted his right hand, swinging a chain at Song Lan, who raised his horsetail whisk to meet it. The two weapons clashed and became entangled. Wen Ning pulled on his chain and retreated, and thus Song Lan, who refused to let go, was dragged out the door. All of the disciples hid inside a neighboring store. They stuck out their necks and watched the two corpses, unable to take their eyes off the spectacle. The whisk, the chain, the sword, the clink and the clang, the sparks flying in all directions. The youths thought that the battle between the fierce corpses was fierce beyond comparison. Each movement was ferocious, each strike aimed squarely at each other's flesh. Only fierce corpses could fight such a vicious battle. If two living people fought the same way, they would have long lost an arm and a leg, or crack their skulls open and splatter their brains everywhere. "Guess who will win?" Xue Yang asked. "Is there a need to?" "Wen Ning, of course," Wei Wuxian said. "It's a pity that even after I stuck so many nails into his head, he still won't listen to me. Some things are too attached to their masters. They cause such a headache." "Wen Ning is not a thing," Wei Wuxian said tonelessly. Xue Yang laughed. "Don't you notice the ambiguity in your words?" Just as the word ambiguity crossed his mouth, he suddenly pulled out his sword and lunged. Wei Wuxian dodged. "Do you often mount sneak attacks while you're talking?" "Of course," Xue Yang said with astonishment. "I'm a hoodlum, after all. It's not as though you just found out. I don't really want to kill you. I just want to stop you from moving and take you back with me first, so you can help me restore the soul, nice and slowly." "I already told you, I can't," Wei Wuxian said. "Ah, don't reject me so hastily. On your own, you might not know where to begin, but the two of us can think of something together." Once more, Xue Yang's sword moved before his words were finished. Wei Wuxian danced out of harm's way across the floor, which was covered with the paper effigies, shredded remains. This delinquent skills are no joke, he thought. Noticing that each swing of Xue Yang's sword was growing faster and each thrust craftier and more vicious, he couldn't help but say, "Are you trying to bully my body for its weak spiritual power?" "Exactly," Xue Yang said. Wei Wuxian had finally run into someone more shameless than him. Smiling in turn, he said, "It's better to offend an honorable person than a hooligan. That means you. I won't fight with you any longer. Someone else will take my place." Xue Yang's eyes crinkled as he smiled. "Who? That Han Guangjun? I sent 300 walking corpses to surround him. He—" But before he could finish, a set of white robes descended from the sky, and Bi Chen's icy, Clear blue light flew directly